Okay, hello everyone. For those on our side of the ocean, it's good evening. To those of you in America, it's good morning or good afternoon. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce our guest, and then I'm not going to let him speak immediately. I'm going to go back and say a few things about roots and some housekeeping matters, and then we will have Yisrael speak. So Yisrael Piekarsh, our guest, is the director of the Anahnu Movement, which is trying to build a new Israeli community.
No, Brian.
The movement sees that Israeli society is fraying into what the president of Israel calls disparate tribes: religious, secular, ultra-Orthodox, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Jew, Arab. Tribes don't understand each other, they don't respect each other, and of course they don't talk to each other. The Anahnu movement that Yisrael is trying to mend Israeli society, not just through dialogue, but through research-based policy and social analysis. One of the main bones of contention driving the tribes of Israeli society is, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is what brings Yisrael to be a guest of Roots tonight. I'm going to stop for a minute and mute everyone. Now, we in Roots may not adopt or agree with all of the solutions and the policy suggestions of Yisrael, the Anahnu movement, but we believe his analysis and his principles are extremely insightful and very important. He has spoken here in Israel-Palestine on the ground to many Roots groups, to activists, to the general public, to Israelis, to Palestinians, and we're honored to have him here with us tonight or today. But like I said, before I let Yisrael speak, I'm going to say a few words about Roots, just to remind everyone. Roots is the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. Roots works in the heart of the conflict in the Palestinian territories that many Jews, including me, call Judean Samaria. There, which means here, we endeavor to build human bridges of acceptance, recognition, partnership, trust, and empathy between the two peoples who live side by side, but completely separate from the other. Through face-to-face meetings and joint programs, we try to begin healing what I often call the hubris of exclusivity, a disease that leads both sides to deny the existence, the narrative, and the legitimacy of the other side. We in Roots believe that we are laying the human groundwork that is necessary for a political solution that would bring peace and justice to this tiny strip of land that both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, call home. I want to urge everyone to visit the website of Roots, friendsofroots.net. Say that again, friendsofroots.net. And there you can read about us. You can listen to and look at the previous online presentations that are there archived, the week last week and the week before and the week before and the week before. You can sign up for our quarterly newsletter, which at this point is going out once a month. And of course, you can donate to our very important, very crucial work. In addition to the website, there's also Facebook. On Facebook, we're Friends of Roots, and I really, really urge everyone to give us a like there. That's a way to be able to be up to date with the coming online presentations. You can also use Facebook to comment on the presentations that you heard, for example, the one tonight, to get into discussions, disagreements, with other people who participated tonight or last week or the week before, and develop their discussion. Of course, spread the word on Facebook, spread the website so we can have more and more people joining us. Next week and the week after and the week after and the week after, etc., it will always be the same time in the same place. 9:30 p.m. Israel-Palestine time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 1:30 New York Eastern time. And those who sign up, of course, we can send you the link. Always Sunday and always at the same time. Next week's program, I'm going to be speaking about Hasidic texts of passionate pluralism. I'm going to present some of the Hasidic Jewish texts that, for me, provide inspiration for the approach of pluralism and of listening, of collecting different approaches to truth, different narratives, that again, for me, undergirds the work that we do in Roots. And the last thing I'll say before we give the floor to Yisrael is that Roots depends on your contributions. Please give generously. And when you sign up for these online presentations, please pay for the ticket if you can. $10 for students, $15 for non-students. All that information is in the Eventbrite notifications that you received and will continue to receive. So after saying all that, we'll give the floor to Yisrael. Yisrael, yes, you have to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us to our lecture about mutual forgiveness, or I prefer mutual pardon. I will start a little bit explaining about our movement and about myself. As Hanan introduced me, my name is Yisrael, and I'm the manager of Anahnu Movement. Our group is a small group, but is on the march, and we are hopefully trying to create a new solution, both for Israeli-Palestinian conflict and to Israeli constitutional conflicts. Our goal is to reunify the Israeli society from both right and left wings, and to bring new solution in these two major conflicts, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and constitutional conflicts. We are offering new ideals, which we developed in a long research of approximately 4 years. In the last 4 years in Israeli society, we met with many Israeli scholars, leaders from politics fields or security, academy, or people who are working with boots on the ground in order to develop their views about Israeli society. And our goal was to think, how can we unify all these points of views and create the ability of the majority of Israelis, Jews and Arabs from all corners of Israeli society to support these new ideals. Now, we have some very new analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which today I'm hope to offer these analysis and to explain our point of view. What we are going to do today is I want to share with you our historical point of view of this conflict from 100 years point of view. And then I want to offer this new approach, this new structure of abilities to change this conflict from conflict to share prosperity. And then, if we will have enough time, I will mention a little bit more about our more detailed solution, about our strategy, how can we start moving forward towards solution. But our goal is to focus more about history and understanding the basic elements and basic structure of our of this conflict. So I'm going to share the screen of my presentation. Everybody can see it? It's okay? Yes? All right. So a little bit about my personal story. I was born in the city of Netanya, if you know it, a little bit northern to Tel Aviv. And I was, all my life, I was part of the educational system of the Tzionut Datit, or Dati Leumi in Israel, which is a very right-wing educational system. And for me, my personal shift changing was started in 2005, 15 years ago. I was a soldier in the armed corps of the Israeli army, and I served in the Gaza Strip right before the disengagement plan was about to happen. I arrived to the Gaza Strip with my unit approximately 1 month before the plan, before the disengagement started, and we withdrew with all the IDF forces in that night, 2 weeks after the disengagement happened. So I was there approximately a month and another 2 weeks. And this specific experience was really significant for me, because what I saw there, because I was part of the military, and I also was part of the Tzionut Datit, and I knew many people, many settlers there, I had this dual experience. From one hand, I used to visit many settlers in the Gaza Strip and listen to their experiences, views, anger. And from the other hand, I had many hours of viewing the Palestinian, specifically Khan Yunis, most of the time, as part of our activity, military activity. And in that point, I started to realize that both right and left wings in Israel, when they're explaining their views about the situation, they're not always telling the entire story of what's going on. We always cut the story in a way that will fit our explanation and our theories. But what I saw on the ground was very different. I saw this huge gap between the settlers and the Palestinians there. It was shocking for me, actually, to see how I'm looking at the settlements, and they are so in such a great economic terms. They had this agriculture technology, and they had these great communities. And I viewing Khan Yunis, and I see so much, so many poor people and poor economy, and people who are suffering every day, struggle to have their bread at night. This was from the one end, and from the other end, I could not ignore the fact that the settlers truly succeed to build something there. And I also could not ignore the fact that in security terms, or from Palestinian or from Israeli perspective, let's say, so many terror organizations were there with different kinds of flags. You saw them everywhere. And society, cleverness, and violence activity from all sides was there. And of course, the military was everywhere, Israeli military, I mean our military. And all this experience pushed me to start rethinking about our society. So on a personal level, I started this long journey of 10 years where I was, first I studied in the Hebrew University, and I had my research on the peace process, especially the year of 2000 and the Israeli policy toward the negotiation with the Palestinians between Barak and Arafat. And I was working in many educational organizations, including Gesher, who worked with Chilonim and Datim, secular and religious Jews in Israel. And I worked with ultra-Orthodox and Arabs in the Knesset and in the Supreme Court and Mount Herzl and many places. And eventually me and my partner, which is couldn't be here today, Aviad Shmila, both of us started to think we need to have a change. We need to rethink about our society and to try to find this new story that can reunite us and bring the interest and the basic ideals and elements of all of our society together in a new form. So this is my personal story, and I'm glad to share my story today with you. And I want to start discussing the history of both sides by viewing two sides narrative, Israelis and Palestinians narratives, as it is in complete and closed structure, meaning that I want us to understand the gaps by showing and explaining for several minutes how both sides are viewing the same facts completely different. So let's start with the Israeli side. And of course, I'm going to mention three important events or periods. The first periods are the British Mandates, 1948 and 1967. Maybe, I don't know, in the coming months, we will have to start adding 2020 to this structure, because the main events of the conflict happened here in these three occasions. So I start with the Israeli perspective. From Zionist perspective, the Jews were under siege, under anti-Semitic siege all over the world. And they had to start changing their faith, have to take their faith and to change it in order to find a new way to have their national lives. And this new way was to come back to their homeland. After trying to come back to the homeland during the British Mandate, Zionist movement tried to purchase lands legally, peacefully. Zionist leaders tried to build a two-state, or to give equal rights to everyone under the ideal of a Jewish national state, and the Arabs refused. They didn't let us to purchase lands. They attacked us with violence and terrorism. And eventually, this whole hatred erupted. And in 1948, they attacked and they refused to the UN declaration, trying to build two-state solution. They refused to it. They attacked the Jewish villages, the Jewish neighborhoods, Jewish towns all over the country. They are the ones who are blamed for the war and responsible for the outcomes of 700,000 Arabs who had to run away because of the war. So this is the basic element story of the British Mandate in 1948. We tried to purchase land, they refused, they opened a war, and they are responsible for the outcomes. In 1967, once again, Arab states tried to blockade Israel and maybe even invaded to our country. So we had to defend ourselves. During the war and trying to defend ourselves, we occupied a lot of territory, historic land of Israel. And today we have to keep these territories as much as we can in order to prevent another attack scenario as much as possible. There are some who think that we need to trade those territories in order to have peace. But the entire Zionist groups are all agreed that we occupied this territory because we had to defend ourselves. And once again, the Arabs must understand that they have responsibility for the outcomes. This is generally the story that the Israeli side is telling himself when you view these facts. Now, what is the story of the Palestinian side? How does he understand all these facts? Obviously, completely different. We start with the British Mandate. It is not a story of Jews who came to the country trying to purchase lands peacefully. No, it's a story about a colonial structure, an empire. I'm talking about the British, who tried to have oil. And they brought this fake nation, Zionist organization, who took these peaceful Jews, which we had a great life. They were our neighbors all over the Middle East. We had a joint and shared prosperity with them. But the Zionist organization shifted their minds and took them to be part of the British policy of colonialism. And what did they try to do? They tried, but with the Balfour Declaration, to change the terms of the politics on the ground, purchase lands with great amounts of money when we are weak, and the British helped them. They completely changed the economy, they changed religious, they changed law in order eventually for the Jews to have more lands and for the British to have more control on the Palestinians. And ever since that event occurred, 100 years ago, we are on the same event with different chapters. It's the same book. The terms are still unequal, leaning toward the Jewish side, which is forced and which the Western world is standing behind him and helping him still take our land. For example, if you, from Palestinian point of view, the Trump declaration that he just had a few months ago is exactly the same story. Big superpower with the Zionist movement, with the Israeli state, tried to take more lands, changing the terms against us. So in 1948, what happened was not unique. It was not new. It was the one single outcome that can happen, where the Jews decided to work with the UN, try to accept completely unequal suggestion of the United Nations, which tries to establish strong Jewish state and a very weak Arab state on our soil, on our land, Palestinian land. And we had to do what we had to do. We had to start trying stopping it. This was the only thing that we could do. And then in 1967, when the Jews had another chance to occupy our land, they did it once again, because whenever they can, they try to take more lands. This is what they're doing ever since 1917 from Balfour Declaration, and they're doing it till these days, all the time. So from Palestinian perspective, the story I just told is basically the same story with different ways, different chapters of the same equation. The Jewish side, the Zionist movement, is trying to take our land, and we have to stop it. So what is the difference between those two stories, and what is the basic mechanism of violence and structure of conflict, which is going on for 100 years, and nobody can even think about how can we stop it? Basically, it looks like this. It's a circle of both sides having claims towards one another, and each side use the claims and the actions of the other side in order to justify his actions. And I will explain. I will start with the Jewish side's claims. The Jewish side basically claims two things. Number one, that the Arabs or the Palestinians are failing to recognize the Jewish nationalism and Jewish rights. They don't accept our presence here. They don't accept our right. They don't accept the ideal that the Jews all over the whole world have one single homeland, which is here in Eretz Israel. They refuse to accept it for many reasons, religious reasons, or more national Arab reasons, but it doesn't matter. They don't accept us. They don't understand our rights and our history. And the second thing, much more strong claim, is that terrorism. They use terror, they're targeting civilians, innocent civilians, in order to have their goals, in order to have, as part of their ideology. And this is why they are our enemy. From Palestinian side, we're talking about three basic claims. Number one, loss of land. The Zionist movement and the Israeli state are aiming to take our lands. This is what they're doing for 100 years, and the only way to stop it is either by strong agreement or by strong power or force. But the basic idea is that we have to stop this process from keep going on all over last 100 years history. The second thing is about the Nakba, or the right of return. In 1948, the Jewish exiled our nation, and we demand that each Palestinian, each refugee will have the right to come back to his own home. Now, it's very important to understand what does it mean, the right of return, from Palestinian point of view. The Palestinians are saying that each refugee and his descendants forever have the right to come back to their homes, and nobody can tell them otherwise, except if they will choose it by their own will. Each refugee or descendant can say, I don't want to come back. I want to be recognized, and that's it. Or I want compensation, and that's it. But no other force, like Israeli state, UN, global powers, nobody can tell him otherwise, not even Palestinian president or Palestinian religious leaders. Nobody can do that. Only they responsible for their own faith. This is the basic ideal of right of return from Palestinian point of view. And the last thing, obviously, is the occupation. The 1967 territories, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Israel must withdraw from the last line that the Palestinians can still hopefully claim, which will be their state, a small part of their original homeland, 22% only. This is the way the Palestinian side are viewing their claims. Now, what is the circle, the structure of connection between those two stories, those two claims? It's a circle that each side is saying, listen, I don't have responsibility for what I'm doing. everything that I'm doing is because of the other side's wrongdoing and injustice actions. If you ask many Palestinians who are against terrorism, why are you supporting or not saying anything when innocent people are being targeted? They will say, what do you want? We are under occupation. There was an Nakba. We have many lands that we lost. What do you want us to do? This is our only possible response. You have to understand us. If you ask many Jews, do you accept the ideal of Nakba? Do you think it's moral actions to take Palestinian lands in a way that the Israeli state took them in the 50s and the 60s? Or do you think that the occupation is okay? They will say, no, it's wrong. But what can we do? We have to defend ourselves from Palestinian terrorism and refuse to accept our national rights. So this is the only thing that we can do. A vast majority, I believe, in both nations consider his actions as moral only because the other side is doing wrong. It doesn't have claims that say that our actions are okay, moral, or that they're strategically the best idea we can think of. But they're saying this is the only thing that we can do because of the other side's action. So this is the circle of the violence we're in. And also there are three disputes about history. Question number one that both sides are in conflict on are, who is the fake? Both sides believe that the other side's nation is a fake one. As I said, the Palestinians are viewing the Zionist movement as a fake organization who took this peaceful nation of Jews all over the world and shift them to be part of the Western superpowers and colonialism or religious aggressives. It depends who you ask in Palestinian politics. But basically, the basic assumption is that the Jews were not so aggressive and they are not a unified nation. It is only a fake ideal of Zionism. And also, from the Zionist perspective or Jewish perspective, many are saying Palestinians are not a nation. They're a group of families. They don't have a shared history. They only start to think about themselves as a nation once we arrived here. Up until then, they were separated families from different areas of the Middle East. The northern areas of the land were part of Syria. The west, the east, the southern families were part of Egypt. Nobody thought about the idea of us being Palestinians. It started only after we arrived here as part of the struggle, the religious struggle against Zionism. So basically, the main element here is that both sides consider the other side as a fake one. Another question is, who is the victim? Both sides believe that they are the victim, and the other side is stronger and it's tougher, and if we won't stand against him, we will lose. And one last question, which is extremely important, and here we can see a very big difference from the Zionist perspective and Palestinian perspective, is the question of determinism or choice. From Palestinian perspective, they don't have responsibility for their actions because it was all part of the same process. Once the British arrived here and released all these energies of the Zionist movement, they had no other choice. It's a huge process of superpowers and strong abilities of the West working against them, the weakest people in the Middle East. And even the Arab states are always betrayed them throughout history. So they had no other choice but to open wars, try to resist and do whatever they can to stop it. From Israeli perspective, they had many choices. The Zionist movement offered them many times to do different ideals, different structures, to have two states, to have equal rights. It's not true that they didn't have choice. They chose to take history and to bring it to the current situation. It's their blame and it's their responsibility. They cannot run away from it. This is maybe the most important question and the most important difference between two sides. And once we understand the structure, we can start understand and try to talk about the ideal of a zero-sum game. This structure take two sides and locking them in a situation by which one side is winning, the other side must lose. They cannot win together. They cannot have shared prosperity. They will always have to remain in a situation where one side is winning, the other side is losing. Every inch in the land which one side is owned, the other side lost. And this zero-sum game is maybe the headline of the 100 years history of both sides, and nobody till now succeed to break it down and to build something else. Even in the 90s, where we had the peace process, the zero-sum game had a major influence on the failure of the peace process. But I want to stop here and maybe collect several questions. Hanan, you offered that you find some questions, maybe.
Yeah, if anyone wants to, at this point, ask a question or two or three, you can write in the chat box and I'll take a look and I'll tell Yisrael what we have there. He thought it would be good not to just take questions at the end, but to stop even at the after the first third. I'm looking in the chat box, looking. Is anyone going to ask anything?
No, if there are no questions, we can continue.
10 more seconds.
All right, so I think there are.
Yeah, Liz has something to say. It seems to me that the error is in the presumption that the British mandate was pro-Israel. I guess Liz means that the error in the Arab narrative is in the presumption that the British mandate was pro-Israel.
Yes, extremely. The only thing that the Zionist movement and the Palestinians are completely agreed is that the British mandate was against them. Both sides believe that the British were against them, and this is unbelievable. Basically, it's a complete collapse of the British policy. But from Arab perspective, definitely, even in 1939, when the British decided to stop Zionist movement from purchase lands or bring more Jews to Israel and to establish their homeland, even then, Palestinians strongly believed, that as long as British are here and they're letting and they're recognizing the institution of the Zionist movement and they're letting them to be part of the area, they're working against Palestinians. It's the most basic assumption of the Palestinian narrative. Okay, so let's move forward and let's try to understand, after we try to view this structure of the circle of the conflict, how does this circle have an influence on the peace process? How does this zero-sum game had its own influence on the peace process? So the first thing we need to understand is that when both sides decided in the Oslo Accord to try to have peace together, what they didn't try to do is to change the structure of the conflict, meaning that both sides still believe in their own claims. They didn't change it. The only thing they try to do is to set a border between sides, to separate between them. And between both sides of the border, two sides will still believe that the other side is the demon, he is the problem, he's responsible, or it was a deterministic issue. But the only thing that we can try to do is to set a border between the two sides. The problem is, as I tried to explain so far, is that the border is not the only issue. The issue is also about identity. It is about the strong feeling of justice of both sides and how they view the core issues that are in conflict. So basically, what happened is that we have two different views about the peace process. As I am about to show you, if we are talking about the gaps between two sides in Olmert and Abu Mazen negotiation in 2008 during the Annapolis process, the gap was almost transparent. It was a tiny gap. If you view it, let's say if I would come from space and only view the gap and try to understand why the two sides are still fighting from 2008, I couldn't get it. They had this strong violence conflict and they had this tiny gap between themselves. So why couldn't they find a way to narrow the gap, to bridge it and to move forward? But the reason is because this is a wrong perspective. The truth is that we have different and conflicting expectations between two sides. Meaning that if one leader tries to move toward the other, as much as it can move toward the other leader and have a joint peace and joint agreement, he must move further and further from his base, political base. And once he arrived to a place where he has this tiny gap from the other side position, he's too far away from his base. And this gap is impossible to be bridged because his base say, no more, that's it. You gave up everything we can possibly believe. And this is what's happened when you're trying to have negotiation with a zero-sum game and you don't solve the zero-sum game before you start the negotiation. And let me try to explain it. These are basically the gaps in 2008 after almost 20 years of negotiations. In Jerusalem, we had a conflict only about 2.2 square kilometers, basically in the area what we are called the holy area of the old city, the Western Wall, Temple Mount, Olive Mountain, and so forth. In borders, we are talking about conflict about 4.6%. Think about it. What is the conflict today with the Trump declaration? We are talking about conflict of approximately almost 30%. Here we are talking about 4.6%. The security issue was finalized between Olmert and Abu Mazen. Now, it's important to explain here. Olmert and Abu Mazen talked with one another in 2008. The first war that Israel and Hamas had in Gaza was in 2009, a year after that. And the Arab Spring all over the area and the collapse of strong states like Syria, Egypt, Libya, and so forth started to happen from 2010, 2011, and so forth. So it's important to understand that when I'm saying that the issue was finalized during the Abu Mazen and Olmert negotiation, it does not mean that today the Israeli society is willing to accept what Olmert was willing to compromise. Benny Gantz was the Israeli chief of staff several years ago, and today he's some sort of prime minister. He said that in the last elections, that what Olmert was ready to compromise was a major mistake, and today he refused to accept it. And this was a very important declaration because it was only expressing the views of many Israelis from the left wing, who today are not willing to accept this issue. But during the negotiation, both sides agreed about the security issues. And the last thing, and most important, was the refugee issue. Both sides agreed that only 80,000 refugees will enter Israel in several years. But the major conflict was what happened after that. The Palestinians understood that no other refugee will enter Israel, but they said we have to maintain their rights. So they started to think about creative ideas. How can they still maintain the rights of Palestinians, although they cannot enter Israel? And the Israeli state don't recognize their rights. We don't recognize the rights from the very beginning. The only reason we are accepting the idea of 80,000 people is because we agreed for peace and from humanitarian reasons, but we don't recognize the right of return. So this was the gap, a tiny gap. But let's view the same ideal from much wider perspective. Let's include the expectations of both sides' political bases. This is what I'm calling the Israeli-Palestinian win-lose system, the zero-sum game. These are the position of Palestinian Authority, and these are the position of Israeli Authority. I tried to divide the four major issues with two different levels. First level are small possibility of compromise. Issues that sides cannot have a big compromise. They only have a very narrow ability to have their own compromise. And other issues are the more increased possibility of compromise. Issues that both sides have better range of possibilities to have their compromise, and then I can move forward toward the other side. If we try to have to try to understand what are the ideals of both sides, we will see that from Palestinian perspective, Jerusalem is the most difficult issue. This is the most basic national element of Palestinian ideal, and they cannot give it up. This was the specific reason why Camp David was exploded and they couldn't get an agreement. I'm talking the summit of Ehud Barak, Yasser Arafat, and Bill Clinton. It was the Jerusalem issue that worked it out. Second thing are the refugees. Both issues are issues of national symbols. Because of the Palestinians' history, and they're being spread all over the area and divided into several communities in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Gaza, West Bank, and inside of Israel, their need to have the national symbols to unify as much as they can their nation is very important, especially because they have these strong, deep divisions. Settlements and borders are something that they can have a little more space to work with. They can have swaps between areas. If Israel wants to have sovereignty over territories in the West Bank, Palestinians are willing to accept it if they will get same amount and equality of land inside of Israel. And the last thing is security. Arafat, when he went to Camp David, he sent a letter to Bill Clinton and he said, if we will have our claims in Jerusalem, refugees and borders, we will have no problem to find a way to bridge the gap in security. And in reality, if we are viewing the peace process, in security issues, the Palestinians did have a lot of abilities, and they did exercise many ways to bridge the gaps. For example, they agreed that the American forces will control their borders. They even agreed that Israeli forces will control the borders under the supervision and control of NATO. So they had a lot of space and they wanted to solve this situation. They didn't want the security issue will be a problem. From Israeli perspective, the most important element are refugees, because the entire goal is to set Israel as a Jewish national homeland, and we need a Jewish majority. We cannot accept the right of return. So refugees is the top level. After that, we're talking about security, because we need our state to be secured from dangers all over the area. Last thing are settlement and borders. It was the basic assumption that Israel is about to withdraw from these territories and to evacuate all settlers or try to have swaps with Palestinians. And the place that we had the wider ability to compromise is Jerusalem. If you are measuring the starting position of Israeli government until the end game in 2008, in Jerusalem issue, you will find the wider gap. Israel went as far as she can in the issues in Jerusalem, and indeed, she changed her first positions. For example, Ehud Barak, before he went to Camp David, he said, we will maintain Jerusalem united, we will not withdraw in Jerusalem. Several days after that, he was willing to withdraw from most East Jerusalem. And this was only the starting point. After that, it moved forward. So basically, this is the element of both sides. Now, if you're viewing the entire table, what you can see is that the refugee issue in both sides is in the higher level of the table, meaning that both sides doesn't have a lot of space to have conversations and to move toward the other. They must maintain their positions. And this is why, if we view the gaps, as I showed you earlier, although it seems like there is no gap, it is only an illusion, because the major conflict is still on the right of return issue. How do you build solution if Palestinian side is saying that all refugees will have the right to return and they're trying to find a way to stop them, and Israel say they have no right, nobody have a right. We can stop them in the borders, but we are willing voluntarily to give them 80,000 people, to give them a pass to enter. This is a serious gap which cannot, which cannot be explained only by political problems and bad situations. It is a problem of the structure. The refugee issue is ranked very high on both sides. So if we try today in 2020 to understand why we are so far away from a peace deal, this is basically the reason. The refugees issue plus security issue, because as I mentioned, from 2009, the security issue was changing, meaning that we have no solution. The expectation of both sides in the refugee terms and the expectation of Israeli side in terms of security make it impossible to have a solution. And this is not the only problem. This is only the first problem. The second problem is, until we will have a solution, it is impossible to collaborate in the field. Maybe we can say, all right, so let's build joint economy. Let's build joint project on the field, and let's build our future that maybe next generations, people will have the ability to have closer expectations and they will build peace. But from Palestinian perspective, this is impossible. They're afraid from normalizing the occupation. They will say, we will start to collaborate with Israel, with her strong economy, which was built, as I say, above the strong back of the superpowers, of global superpowers. And then we will have nothing. We will have maybe a little bit better lives, but our goals, our identity, our justice will be lost. So we cannot have any joint collaboration. This assumption of Palestinians is not strict only to the West Bank. It is also an assumption of the Palestinian organization inside of Israel. Those who want to be part of Israeli society, but they don't want to be part of Israeli identity. And they are always in a clash inside of them. How much can we collaborate with Israel? How much do we need to stop every project, every social and economical project that will prepare us to be part of Israel? We don't want to be part of Israeli identity. We want to be part of a new Israeli society, which will give us a true equal rights. So basically we're stuck. We cannot do anything. We cannot solve the conflict and we cannot collaborate on the ground. So what can we do? In order to understand better our possibilities, I want to think better about different options. Let's try to understand the historical process which I just explained and the structure of conflict. Let's try to think about it in a new way. Does it the only way that we can have joint connection between people? So when the Zionist movement established the Zionist organization in 1897, we start to think, how can we divide the land? We want to bring all the Jews, to assemble as much Jews as we can, basically from Eastern Europe at that time. And we want to bring them to our land, to Eretz Israel. But when we arrived here, we didn't know. But we find out that there are different nations here, different people, religious, different families, and they have other dreams than our dream. And our dream might harm them, because we are offering them equal rights, but we are also telling them that they are about to be a minority in our state. So the main question is, how do we divide this country? How do we set the border between those states? We are offering two states, we are offering equal rights, but how do we divide it? There are only two options when we are facing this unique process. Option number one is what I just explained about the zero-sum game, what I just mentioned. Meaning, once we set the border, we want that our side, either Palestinian or Israeli, doesn't matter, will have a better position toward the solution of dividing the land. So each side must try to have more land, more places, and better strategic positions in order for the division to occur. So the process in a zero-sum game, as I just mentioned, is that the Zionist movement is trying to have more and more lands, villages, towns all over the country, in order for us to be prepared for the situation where the international community will offer us to divide the land and set a border. And the Palestinian side is trying to stop Zionist movement. This is one scenario. This is what happened, but it is only one scenario. The second scenario, a second possibility, which didn't happen, but could have happened, is what we are calling a shared prosperity, meaning that both sides will set a principle, will sit down and think, where can we put the border? Well, how can we build the better shared prosperity? And let's agree how to set the borders. It sounds imaginary because that wasn't what happened. Both sides eventually decided to have a zero-sum game, but it could have happened. Theoretically, they could have sat and think, how do we build these two states? How do we divide these bridges? For example, what are the minority rights that the Palestinian side want in order to accept the Jewish state? What are the what will be the policy, what will be the agreement between two sides, where we can set a border? Obviously, it wasn't the situation. So what we have today, this unique conflict, is a situation in which both sides have a conflict about identity and not just territory. It's not a conflict about the border. This is why the peace process, in my opinion, didn't work, because it didn't handle the basic problem. The basic problem is an identity problem. From Palestinian perspective, every border that we will set will be only a part of their homeland. They will have to give it up because of a zero-sum game against Zionism. And from Zionism perspective, every border that we will set will have also to be only part of the land, and we will have to give up major areas of our original historic homeland. And there are people in Israeli and Zionist politics who are saying we are not ready to do that. Today we are seeing it in Israel, just these days, every day on the evening news. People who are saying this is our land, we are not going to give it up no matter what. And they have a major influence on Israeli politics. They are not the majority, but they have an influence. This was always the story of Zionist movement. So to summarize the unique terms of our conflict, we can have a zero-sum game, we can have shared prosperity, but we have to decide to move from one doctrine to another. In history, this unique conflict was shaped by a zero-sum game, and the question is, can we move forward to shape it in a shared prosperity? So I want to offer a way to do that today, taking into consideration the last 100 years of history. This is the circle and structure of conflict as we said it in our earlier, in the beginning of our lecture. The first thing we have to do is to break the circle. We have to shift the point of view of both sides and to say a very basic rule, joint basic rule. Injustice does not justify injustice. Nobody, Israeli or Palestinian, can justify his own wrongdoing in terms of the other side wrongdoing, in terms of the other side injustice. Each side first will look on his own actions, and only then will have to have, it will set a claims for the other side. It's very important to explain. We are not talking about both sides to give up on the other side claims. That would be impossible. But what we are saying, for example, if you're Israeli and you are extremely angry about the Palestinian terrorism, this does not mean that you can still keep the occupation ongoing. It does not mean that we can ignore the Israeli side responsibility about the Palestinian refugees' fate all over the area. And we cannot ignore the issue of land, which is still this day going on inside of Israel, not only in the West Bank, the loss of lands inside of Israel. Even if we have strong justified claims against Palestinian terrorism, even if we want the Palestinians to recognize our rights, we cannot keep doing these actions. And exactly the same thing must happen in the Palestinian side. Even if they believe that the occupation is a historical 100 years occupation and the Nakba is a basic right, human rights of all Palestinian refugees, and even if they believe that Israel must want to take their land, they still cannot have terrorism as part of the national struggle. They cannot target innocent lives in order to reach their goals. And basically, once we have this most extremely important moral rule, then we can move forward to the second stage, which we are talking about mutual pardon. Meaning that both sides will say, okay, we had this long history of violence. Both of us did wrong. And now, once we understand that we are not only going to blame the other side, and we are going to take responsibility for our wrongdoing, now we need to build our trust and to have mutual pardon. This headline of mutual pardon will give both sides new possibilities. And I want to explain how do we in Anahnu Movement believe that we can do that. First, because of the asymmetric power of both sides, Israel is very strong and Palestinians are very weak. The one that must start this new road must be the Jewish side. If the strong side will take upon himself these new ideals in the first stage, then Palestinians can move forward with them. And I'm not talking about the government to accept it. I'm talking about a group of Jews, a strong group and very from different parts of the Jewish people, to accept these ideals, to declare publicly that they are willing to think about it and to move forward with these ideas, to check it out. Then immediately we will see Palestinian sides moving toward this group and saying, we are willing to work with you. This is not a theory. These are things that we are doing. We are signing up people from the Jewish side saying we are willing to test it. And I'm not talking only about the left wing, I'm talking also about right wing people, settlers. Both left and right wings in the Jewish politics in Israel, Zionist politics in Israel, who are willing to accept this ideal, are bringing with them, because of we're bringing their word to the Palestinian side, and many Palestinians, much more Palestinians are willing to accept it and move with us. We are seeing it on Facebook, we are seeing it on lectures that we are giving, on tours. As we move forward with these ideals, we are building the gap, and the original possibility of shared prosperity is today as we are working. So this is rule number one. The Jewish side must start it, and then Palestinians must accept. First, one step of the Jewish side, another step of the Palestinian side until we reach our goal. The second thing that we believe that must happen is that we should not wait until the final stage of this process. We shouldn't wait for the entire solution. Once we are talking about mutual pardon, we are having new possibilities today to have a joint economy, joint social activities, and joint struggles to have more equal rights in Israel. Because from Palestinian perspective, as I mentioned, they don't want to collaborate today because they're fearing that the solution will be lost. But if we are talking about mutual pardon, then they understand that the solution will not lost because the entire collaboration between both sides, the entire situation of both sides moving forward together is based on the ideal that we are eventually going to have a solution, mutual pardon. And the third term, which is very important, as I mentioned earlier, is not not part of our lecture today, is to have strategic solution for all four core issues: Jerusalem, land, borders, settlements, refugees, and security, to have a new solution that will be based upon the idea of mutual pardon. Maybe if I will have enough time at my last word, then I will mention a little bit about our idea. So this is the structure that we are trying to build. And as I said, we are doing it on the ground with tours. We are working together on both sides. For example, we have a tour about the 1948 issue on Mount Herzl, which is the most important place for Zionist narrative, Zionist memory. And right after that, we are moving 20 minutes drive to the Palestinian village of Lifta, which was destroyed in 1948. And we are talking about the Palestinian narrative. And then we are offering our ideal of mutual pardon. So we are moving forward to my last words, and then I will gladly answer a question if you have. I want to invite you to view our website, to view a little bit more about our solution, about our activity. You can also join our newsletter and to have better understanding of our activity and to keep in your mind what we're doing. And we're sending a newsletter something like once in a month, depending on what we are doing. And I also want to invite you to view our YouTube channel, and you can also do it through our website to view our movie about our solution, as I said, about our strategic solution regarding the core issue. Generally, as I said, I will explain it only in a few words, and then maybe we will see the movie, and I will open the floor for questions. Generally, we believe in the ideal of minority pardoning, meaning that the only way that both sides will shift their minds and understand the rights of the other side is if each side will accept the minority existence of the other side. From Israeli perspective, then is mean to accept limited right of return, meaning that the Palestinian Arab amount inside of Israeli society will be 30% and the Jewish majority will be 70%, an increase of 10% in the minority of Palestinians inside of Israeli society. And also that the Palestinians will accept the presence of settlers. The settlers will be citizens of both states, both Israel and Palestinians. They will have equal rights and obligations toward the Palestinian country. And for all that, we have a very important security and state structure that is supporting these ideals and give them the ability to be realized with stable strategic situation. As I mentioned earlier, what we are doing, one of our most important activities, to sign up Jewish people's side to support this solution. So for my final words, I just want to show you this movie, and then we can move forward for questions about our structure. I just want to say this is a Hebrew movie, but with English translation. So if it won't work, just tell me and I will stop it. But I think we can try.
בהתחלה אלו היו סיסמאות. היום הרוב כבר לא מאמינים שאפשר להגיע להסכם. אבל האם התנגדות להסכם?
You don't see anything on the screen.
מה השתנה? אני האמנתי בו, סבבה.
It's okay?
Yeah, now we do.
עקירת יישובים קורעת את העם. בהתחלה אלו היו סיסמאות. היום הרוב כבר לא מאמינים שאפשר להגיע להסכם. אבל האם התנגדות להסכם? הדרך היחידה. ברור, מה השתנה? אני האמנתי בו, סבבה, אבל התפכחתי מאז, הטרור, המלחמות. בגלל זה אי אפשר לסמוך עליהם. כן, אבל מה יהיה בעתיד? זה נכון, צה"ל יכול להגן, אבל לא יכול לסיים את הטרור לנצח. והמצב בשטח מוביל גם לקרע חמור בין השמאל והימין. שלא לדבר שמעמדנו בעולם לא יציב. ואין מה לעשות, לראות את הילדים הפלסטינים גדלים ללא תשתיות ועתיד, זה לא פשוט. אבל זה מרגיש שהערבים לא רוצים פתרון. יכול להיות, אבל מה איתנו? מה אנחנו יכולים לעשות? אנחנו? אנחנו היא תנועה שמקדמת הסכמה ישראלית חדשה בין השמאל והימין. הגישה המדינית שלנו מסתמכת על 3 הנחות מוצא מרכזיות. מתקדמים על בטוח, לוקחים אחראים ומשתנים. עם הנצח לא מפחד מדרך ארוכה. מתקדמים על בטוח פירושו שלצד ישראל תקום מדינה פלסטינית בקווי 67 עם חילופי שטחים. הממשלה הפלסטינית תאפשר לאזרחי ישראל המתגוררים בגדה המערבית לבחור אם להתפנות או להישאר בביתם כאזרחים פלסטינים עם זהות ואזרחות ישראלית. השתגעת? ומה לגבי הביטחון? בשלב הראשון הפלסטינים ייקחו אחריות ביטחונית וצה"ל יישאר בשטח. אם יוודא לכוחות הביטחון שלנו שהפלסטינים מפרים את ההתחייבות שלהם, אז צה"ל יחזור לפעול בשטח עד שהפלסטינים ישובו לעמוד בתנאי ההסכם. בשלב השני, לאחר שיוכח שהביטחון נשמר, ישראל תיסוג מהשטח. אך אם יתעורר מצב חירום וחיי ישראלים יהיו בסכנה, אז חיילינו ישובו לשטח הפלסטיני עד שהמצב יתייצב. הכל בפיקוח בינלאומי. ומה ההבדל בין זה לבין אוסלו? לפי הגישה שלנו, הנסיגה הצבאית של ישראל אינה מבוססת על אמון, אלא על תוצאות בשטח. מעניין, אבל כדי להסכים על הסדר כזה, דרוש שינוי תפיסה גדול בשני הצדדים. מה שמוביל לנקודה הבאה. אנחנו מאמינים ששינוי צריך לבוא גם מלמטה, ולא רק בהסכם מדיני. קודם שהפלסטינים יכירו בנו. יש דרך נוספת. אם שני העמים ייקחו אחריות על מעשיהם הפסולים ויעניקו חנינה זה לזה, יש סיכוי לשינוי מלמטה. ישראל למשל צריכה לקחת אחריות על מניעת כניסת הפליטים הפלסטינים החפים מפשע לשטחה. ישראל צריכה להכיר בכך שהעם הפלסטיני לא יכול לקבל הסכם בלי זכות שיבה. ואז יהיה בישראל רוב ערבי ששונא אותנו. תנועת אנחנו שואפת להכיר בזכות השיבה רק אם הפלסטינים יסכימו לרוב יהודי של 70% מכלל אזרחי ישראל. הפליטים ייכנסו לישראל כאזרחים שווי זכויות בתהליך ארוך ומבוקר שיארך כ-50 שנה. אך אם הם לא יהיו שומרי חוק ולא יקלטו כיאות, ישראל תעצור את תהליך כניסתם עד שהמצב ישתנה. ובכל מקרה, לא ניתן יהיה לשנות את זהותה היהודית והדמוקרטית של ישראל, אלא ברוב מהותי של 75% מאזרחי ישראל, הכולל רוב מוחלט מאזרחיה היהודים. ומה לגבי הטרור? הפלסטינים יצטרכו לקחת אחריות על הטרור כנגדנו. חובתה של ישראל לפעול נגד הטרור הפלסטיני בכל מקום כדי להגן על ישראל. אך לצד זאת, במצב הנוכחי הימצאותם של היישובים הישראלים בגדה המערבית מונעת מהפלסטינים מדינה עצמאית, ולעיתים אף פוגעת בזכויותיהם הפרטיות. זהו כיבוש פסול שגורם לפלסטינים המתונים להשתתק. על ידי כך, הביטחון שלנו נפגע. אם המתנחלים יסכימו להשתלב במדינה הפלסטינית וישראל תכיר בזכות השיבה, נוכל לפעול לשינוי עמדתם ביחס לזכויות הלאומיות שלנו, להכיר בארץ גם כמולדתנו. בתוך כך גם לדרוש מהם לקחת אחריות על הטרור שביצעו כלפינו. אבל לא נצליח להסכים על הכל. למשל הר הבית. הר הבית הוא מקום של אמונה ותפילה שמסמל את תקוותנו לשוב לארץ ישראל, אבל הפך עם השנים לזירת היאבקות בתוך העם היהודי ובין ישראל לפלסטינים. בפועל יש שם ריבונות פלסטינית. אנו נכיר בריבונות הפלסטינית בהר הבית ובכותל הדרומי שמחוץ לרחבת המסגדים נקים מוסד חדש למורשת היהודית בירושלים שיאחד את כל העם. במקביל, נציע לדון עם הפלסטינים על רחבת תפילה ליהודים, בחפירות ארכיאולוגיות במתחם הר הבית עצמו.
נו באמת, אין סיכוי שהם יסכימו לשום דבר שאמרת.
אז בינתיים נתחיל בלהסכים בינינו. נגדיר את עמדת ישראל, נרוויח את האחדות בעם, ונייצב את הקשרים שלנו עם הקהילה הבינלאומית. כשגם הצד הפלסטיני יחליט להשתנות ולהצטרף בעוד כמה שנים או כמה דורות, נקבל אותם כשותפים שווים. עם הנצח לא מפחד מדרך ארוכה. ואיך כל התהליך הזה מתחיל? קודם כל, עלינו להחתים אזרחים ישראלים מימין ומשמאל על תמיכה ברעיונות שלנו. לאחר מכן, נפנה לקהילה הבינלאומית ולפלסטינים, ונתרחב גם ליוזמות מעשיות. הפוטנציאל גדול, אנחנו כבר יצאנו לדרך. ואתם...
Oh, sorry. All right. So this was a very short movie about our solution. As I said, this is all part of our mutual pardon paradigm, and that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening. And now I will invite Hanan to have some questions, and I will try to answer as much as I can.
Yeah, let's start with Roy Martin. And he asks, how do we deal with the fact that Israelis feel the state must remain majority Jewish and the Palestinians feel they cannot give up their right to return? It seems a shared prosperity requires a willingness to have a multi-ethnic rather than a Jewish state. Am I off base?
It's a very important question. What our solution is talking about a Jewish state with a Jewish majority. If we have an analysis of the Zionist goals, the Zionist movement still maintain all of their goals with 70% majority of Jews. The question is, how can we maintain this majority, especially if all Palestinians and refugees that will enter the country will be equal citizens as we are talking about? So our answer is this. If we are fearing from the Palestinians to move from 30% to 40% or maybe 51%, then we must fear today much more than in the structure of our solution. Because today, almost the entire Palestinian society inside of Israel, the 20% Arabs inside of Israel, are completely against the ideal of a Jewish state. Some of them are more moderate, some of them are more extreme, but generally they believe that the current ideal, the current constitutional ideal of Israel is wrong. And if they will bring themselves to 30%, then we will have a major clash. And I will tell you even this, today we have a major clash. In the last elections, the reason why Israel was so divided was because that one side, the left side, started to think about joining into coalition with the joint party of the Arab people in Israel. And from the right-wing perspective, this is a red line. Maybe, I don't want to say, but maybe even a reason for a civil war, because they don't accept the equal right, the equal existence of Palestinians' ideal in Israeli politics. And eventually what happened was that the only possibility for part of the left to join to the right wing and to establish a new government. But this is not a good path. The current situation is much worse than our suggestions, because our suggestions have a very important term. The Palestinians must pre-accept the ideal of a Jewish state. They must be part of this new ideal of reconciliation and of mutual pardon. And also we have this new idea which I didn't mention, you can see it on our website, about a constitutional idea regarding Palestinian minority rights. But we believe that once we will have the agreement of both sides, then even if this scientific miracle will happen and they will jump from 30% to 40%, it still will be better from the current situation by which if they will have this jump, they will be completely against the country and the entire Israeli politics will be on a chaos, much bigger than we have today. So this is why we believe, although there is a fear and the Zionist crossroads of decision was never easy, was never good against bad. It was always mixed possibilities and mixed scenarios. The best range of possibilities is assembled in our position much better than in the current situation.
Hey, there's a question. Let's see, there's a question here from the Udelmans. What steps do you see the Israeli side taking to start this process?
I can say about our movement, what are the processes that we are planning? The first thing is to try to have this new narrative, this mutual pardon narrative, as strong and as far as we can get. We are now building a school of tours. We are currently in the COVID-19 crisis, so it's a little bit difficult, but what our plans are to build schools for tours, and also to have our lectures all over the country, to sign up Jews to support, as first step, to support our ideals, and also bring Palestinians to share their views supporting these ideals. So this is the first, let's call it the soft power stage. Second stage, we want to take projects that will show to both sides that we can have it differently. If we can split the issue of security and the issue of equal rights from one another, then we will learn, then we will explain to both societies that we can have shared prosperity. We have a different ability to work it out. What we are thinking about is a project regarding the land issue in both sides of the Green Line, both in Israel and on the West Bank. We believe that if we will set a rule that security is extremely important and we are not going to give it up, but we are talking about equal security, not profiling security as we have today in Israel. Equal security, much similar to things sometimes we are seeing in America. And we will say that once we maintain security, we still need to have different approach regarding the land issue, then we can start having the change in both sides. Because from Palestinian perspective, they will say, you see, they are Jews. For the first time, we believe that the land policy in Israel and the West Bank is wrong. And from Palestinian perspective, and from Israeli perspective, they will say, listen, if we can split the issue of security from equal rights, then why not? Many Jews, I believe that the majority will say, if we can do that, then why not? What we are talking about are two projects. First, inside of Israel, is to build new neighborhoods for Arabs on land owned by the government. In Israel, as you know, 93% of the land is owned by the government. And what we want to do is to build new neighborhoods for Arabs, for Palestinians on the soil of the Israeli government. It is very important because this will be the shift that we said. We don't want the process will only be to take land from the Arabs and to bring it to Jews for the government, but also other way around, from the government, from the Jewish control to the Palestinian side. This is inside of Israel. And outside of Israel, in the West Bank, what we want to do in the first stage is to have joint areas, joint natural areas, that both sides will be able to have a joint activities, social activities, because today, when Israel declares an area of the nature, I forgot the word, but an area which is declared by the government to be
nature preserve.
Nature preserve, thank you. Today, the situation is that the government is making many actions or giving the settlers the ability to create these natural reserves only for Jews. It is not by law. It's not that Palestinians cannot enter this natural preserve, but the area is very clear. If you are doing that, you are going to be checked by soldiers. All the signs are in Hebrew. All the activities are for Jews, and basically you have nothing to do here. So it is very common policy in the West Bank. And what we want to have is a struggle to say, no, this is a place for both sides. And both sides can live inside to have joint activities on these areas. And as we said, we are not going to give it up on a security issue. Everybody will be checked. The entire process will be secured by the best abilities that we will have, but it will be an equal security check and an equal ability to have a joint activities. This is first stage. Second stage, what we're hoping in the far future is to start building the civil structure for a Palestinian state. And once again, we're saying this has nothing to do with security. Israel, if she needs to keep the military activities in order to stop and defend Israelis from terrorism, she must do that. But, and this is the very new thing, it doesn't mean that similar to that, Palestinians does not need to build their state from civil structure perspective. It has nothing to do. We want to say that even though both sides are having military clashes, the same level, those who are supporting peace must act today similar to that to build civil structure for Palestinian state alongside Israel, basically assuming our solution, as I said, of minority paradigm. But this is in the long term. So this is what we believe will start to have change, and we have many more projects on other issues also, as I mentioned, constitutional issues inside of Israel.
Yisrael, we only have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read one last question. I'm going to skip to the question of my old friend Yechezkel Landau, who's been involved in trying to build bridges between Israelis and Palestinians for, I think, 40 years. Yechezkel writes as follows: I value the moral courage in this position, the readiness to acknowledge and perhaps express remorse for past policies and atrocities. But it sounds to me like another case of Jews negotiating with themselves. I would want to hear the message in Arabic expressed by mainstream Palestinian figures, both in Israel and also in the West Bank and ideally Gaza. Without a guarantee at the outset that the outcome will be adjacent sovereignties, why would the Palestinians agree to participate in the process? Also, the identity issue is still ignored, with the focus on practical exchanges of benefits. This seems to me putting the cart before the horse.
All right, so regarding the first issue, I agree. The question is very important. Why does the Palestinian needs or want to join the process? As I said, I know today that if Jewish side will start first and they will see that the strong side is putting his position, saying that he is willing, have his willingness to start this process, then the Palestinian side will feel much better to join the process. This is number one. Number two, I want to answer very honestly. I don't know what will happen with the Arab side. I see today on the ground many people who are willing to join us. I see that the institution, the official institution of Palestinians are referring our movement in a very no comment policy. So I don't know what will happen, but I know this: even if the Palestinian side will never enter, on the next few generations will never enter this process, it is still worth it, because we can still unify the right and left wing inside of the Jewish people. We can still have international support in Israel, and we will open the possibility, honestly open a possibility for shared prosperity. Now, I believe, and I think that I know, I can say for sure that I know that many Palestinians will join. And I don't think it will only end with unifying the Jewish people or with international community. But even so, if it will happen and my analysis is wrong, it is still worth it, even if, as a possibility. If we will be honest, we will have a civil structure for Palestinian, constructing the Palestinian state. We will offer the Palestinian minority inside of Israel new possibilities, then it's still worth it, even if the Arab side will not join in the next few generations. But I believe he will join, and with his vast majority. Second thing regarding the identity issue, it's very complicated. I completely agree that this is part of the process. And because of that, as I said, we don't want to only say, listen, let's build borders, let's put this minority and that minority in bids security. This is not what we are doing. As I mentioned, what we are studying is with the soft issues, with identity issues, with the narratives, with the mutual pardon, with learning about the identity of the other side. Now, we all know this conflict. Not everyone on both sides, and I even say the current situation is that the majority on both sides doesn't want to hear anything about the other side's identity. So what we are doing, we're trying to say, listen, under mutual pardon, the amount of people that will have the readiness to listen to the other side problems and to understand his identity and his rights will be bigger. At first, it will be a minority in both sides, but as long as we keep it going with the land project issue, with mutual pardon issue, with mutual tours, we believe that eventually we will have new allies between Arabs and Jews, right and left. This is what we are building today. Today in our movement, we already have these new allies, and we are building it in order to have as much as we can. And eventually, we hope that we will have a change in both societies. So basically, I'm optimistic, and I believe that we are on the right track.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Yisrael.
Thank you very much,
all for joining us. Everyone knows, I hope you know, that Roots is not a political movement. We don't have a specific political plan in mind for a future settlement. And therefore, Roots doesn't necessarily adopt or endorse the plan that Yisrael put forward. Roots is a grassroots movement preparing the groundwork for a future settlement. And certainly, Roots and Anahnu, Yisrael's movement, see eye to eye on the work that has to be done on the ground with the two peoples to build towards this sense of partnership, of trust, of getting over our past enmity and moving towards empathy, moving towards partnership, moving towards equality, moving towards understanding, and towards the mutual pardon that Israel talked about. And indeed, many things we are, these two movements, Roots and Anahnu, doing together on the ground. Please look at Yisrael's website, Anahnu, as he told us. Those who feel connected, please donate, because they need money, just like Roots needs money. We can't continue without the support from around the world. And please join us next week, same time, at these Roots online presentations. As I said at the beginning, next week will be Hasidic sources of pluralism, some of the Jewish spiritual foundations of the work we're doing in Roots. Again, thank you for joining us and have a good week. Shavua Tov. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Israel.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.